going to go back to your mother and being the colorful one. Um, we once went out to dinner with her, and it was an early time when we first got to know her, and uh, it was at a Japanese restaurant, and she had a tendency after we had all finished this giant meal that had been actually ordered by John Hertz, and he wanted to. He actually said he wanted us to meet with them. It was all finished, and she came along, and we had a wonderful duck dinner. And after it was done, and we're all finished, she just turned to us and asked if anybody was going to eat the duck's head. And she just, when we all said, no, I think we'll pass, including your father, who also sort of rolled his eyes, she took the duck's head and finished it off, crunch by crunch. Now, I think that was a perfect introduction because in later times she was always talking about different things that she was doing. Um, and I thought that was one of the most typical types of introductions I had ever heard that someone had ever, and I shouldn't say typical, one of the most striking types of introduction I ever got to any single person in the world. Um, was that a typical behavior for her, or was this a bit bizarre even for her?
No, I'd say that was on point. Yeah, she would pretty
Okay.
much try anything, and um,
I
yeah,
had to ask that question since it's stuck in my head since the first
we need
time.
to make it clear the duck was dead to begin with.
I think so, since the rest of it was gone.
Right.
Um, but no, it was a wonderful introduction to tell us that we did not have a standard person that we were at dinner with. And uh, she was always good for a good story or two later on. Um, do you have any, shall I call them, unusual stories about things that she did?
Oh gosh, that's when you didn't give me ahead of time, so I haven't
No, it
rummaged in the
wasn't. I'm
memories to bring
sorry.
something up. Nothing specific comes to mind that will fit in the context of this. So,
Okay. Ed Meshke's told us a story once that he was out there and um, visiting, and then she came by the place where he was staying, I think with Felice, but I'm not sure. And at about 12:30 in the morning, and grabbed him and said, "This is the best time for me to show you around San Francisco." And they then did a 2 or 3 hour tour of all the places she thought he should be going to while he was there um, at 2, 3 in the morning. um,
actually, I've remembered an anecdote that you will enjoy, I think, about my mother and food stuff. So,
yes.
um, forget the exact details of it, but she had gone, I think, to a New Year's Day party that my dad and I had not gone to. And so she was driving in the Berkeley Hills. So that's just a ridge that runs between Berkeley and Orenda, where we lived. And it's a twisty road and forested and really very lovely. And she saw a dead deer by the side of the road and got out and looked at it. And it was still warm. And it was a yearling deer. It was a very young deer. And so theoretically, you call the sheriff's department and they whisk it away. But she said, "This is a perfectly good, very fresh deer. I'm going to take it home." So she tossed it into the trunk of the car and brought it home and came up to my dad and said, "Look what I found." And we had a neighbor up the street who was a hunter. So he helped them hang it up in the garage and dress it out. And then she uh, got in touch with Tony Boucher, again, fine cook. And, this is a young deer, so it needed to be prepared. It's not a gamey venison. It needed a more delicate hand. So they came up with a recipe that it's called venison sevagram, and was printed in the first Cooking Out of This World cookbook that Anne McCaffrey edited.
Oh, okay. And so you had that for a festival dinner of some
Correct.
kind. Well,
So I think a couple of comments about, we might ask Astrid about the Christmas of 1961 when the family had a visitor from the South Pole. Unless you're asking about my uncle, I'm not sure who you mean. Andy, are you asking about my uncle?
Yes, I'm asking about your uncle.
Okay, I don't remember the specific Christmas portion of it, but so my uncle, my father's brother, was a geologist, and he was part of the team that did the first survey of the Sentinel Range in Antarctica, and so he stopped by the Bay Area on his way back home. It sounds like it was a Christmas. And yes, and then somebody also mentions Karen once replicated the dishes from the Eddison fish dinner in Memison for a party, and I think that was a dinner party in 1973, maybe, that Fritz Leiber was at our house. It was a big complicated meal.
I asked about the Christmas of 61 because your mother wrote about it in her sap zine that unexpectedly your uncle appeared on either Christmas or Christmas Eve and had 24 hours before he had to fly somewhere else. And so she wrote about her Christmas plans being thrown into high speed and changed dramatically. And I wondered if it had made any impression, but
Not in the least. Oh my gosh, no, that's fascinating. I'll have to dig that up. No, so John, he was this exotic figure that kind of came and went. So yeah. And then somebody's asking about Poul and Karen's historical writing. So they wrote a 4-part thing called The King of Ys that, as part of their work for it, they went to Brittany in France and stayed in a little house called a gîte or a gîte, where you can rent a cottage in the countryside. And Sandra, okay, very good. And so they did a lot of research for it. And my mother did some maps and so on, and all that material is also on file at the Eden Collection at UC Riverside.
Would this be a good time to show some photos? Joe?
Yes, I think so. Go ahead. And Astrid, can you, if you need to make any additional comments as the photos come up, please do.
Sure. So this is from my parents' wedding in Berkeley in 1953. And this is circa 1957. So this was at our house in Berkeley at Christmas time. So that's me in the middle. And this is a early costume of mine. And I think I'm, or is this it? So I think that's the outfit that I wore to the first SCA tourney, which was a cherry velvet sort of dressing gown thing that my mother did a little bit of embroidery on. You can see on the chest there, and it was a thrifted item that got remade into a costume, and I'm wearing a little tiara of something. I'm not sure if that's an SCA event or not. It looks kind of like it's on a stage, maybe at a convention. Or it says Pacificon on the caption. These captions are really tiny, so I have to kind of peer in. So here's an early days of the SCA, 1968, but I don't believe this was at the Baycon. I think this was just at a summer warm weather tourney. And it's so sad how many of the people in this picture are dead. So on the left, Dorothy Jones, my mother seated to her right, Clint Bigglestone to her right, and then Owen Hannafin has his head in my mother's lap. And then I am kind of center right in the pink sari. Steve Perrin is also dead on the right, far right. And he went on to be very involved in gaming and had a gaming company, Chaosium, I believe it was called. And then I think the very far right is Don Simpson, but I'm not 100% sure. And wearing the chainmail, kind of dark. And and Paul Mosslander is in the background, and I don't know if he's alive or not. So kind of right above my head, the dark figure. And this is my parents, and it says FunCon 1968, and Bijo Trimble on the left. FunCon was a mixture of, it was kind of bringing in media, Star Trek and movies and so on. And I think it kind of got combined with WesterCon, but I'm not 100% sure of that, but it was a good convention. And this is me at, also at FunCon Masquerade. And this is the Larry Niven costume that I mentioned, Larry Niven character that I mentioned. So it doesn't show really well in this photograph, but I painted myself blue and my hair was spray painted silver and orange. The character, it was said to have hair, a headdress or a hairdo that was an explosion of orange and silver. So it was kind of a swirling effect that I did. At the time, you could get silver hairspray and gold. That was washed out pretty easily, but they did not make an orange hairspray that I could find at the time, back in the dark ages of 1968. So I used regular orange spray paint, which I had to get out with acetone, which is not a good thing on your hair and not a good thing to get in your eyes. So people don't do this at home. So this was at, and this was 69. Okay, looks like the date up there. This was a International Film Festival in Rio de Janeiro that my parents and a lot of other science fiction people got invited to. I did not go on that one. So in this picture, you can read the text. Kate Wilhelm, Damon Knight, Karen Anderson, Poul Anderson are on the far side of the table looking to the left. And then with their back to us is John Brunner, Robert Bloch, and Forey Ackerman. And this is the Bat and the Bitten. I'm not sure which iteration of this is 69. Yeah, so this was at St. Louiscon. And so the black costume was my mother's, and she had done a costume called Countess Dracula at a Midwest or Eastern Worldcon in the late 1950s, like maybe 1959, and just kept it around as one does. And we were just kind of, chatting one evening, and I think my dad said, if cats had kittens, do bats have bittens? And we thought, oh, bat, bitten, that's interesting. And then, so we came up with the idea of this costume. And this is Greg and Ray Bradbury at Jet Propulsion Laboratory in 1979. So this is in the Von Karman Auditorium. You can see the big Voyager space probe behind it, and that's an actual one. It has pretty much all the guts to it. It was like the spare, the one that didn't go into space. They built 3 of them, and so there it is. And Bradbury was kind of a mentor to Greg. They got to be quite good friends. David Clark and Greg would go to Bradbury talks as when they were high school students in the Southern California area. Bradbury lived in Los Angeles, so it wasn't a big deal for him to come down to LA, down to San Diego. It wasn't a big journey. So they saw him many times and got to be good friends. And then Greg and he became colleagues. So I have a whole lot of signed Ray Bradbury items here. He's clearly signing something for Greg. So the JPL thing was you could get press accreditation and go to see the Voyager briefings. You'd see the information coming in. I got to do this from late 1980 on. It was just so amazing. There'd be science journalists and a sprinkling of science fiction folks there as well. It was really cool experiences. This is our wedding, which was held in the Jessie Shepherd House, which is a beautiful Victorian mansion in San Diego. And so this is 1983. I made the dress that I'm wearing, and Greg, that's a rented suit that Greg's wearing. And this is Greg at Comic-Con 1985, a Jackie Estrada photo. So this was, Comic-Con was in kind of the gawky middle school years of it. I was still relatively small again. That was probably at the old convention center, which is a a much smaller building than the new convention center is. And this is us and our daughter, Chloe. This is when Greg was guest of honor at Boscone in 1988. And this is us at home. Behind Greg's head is the original Jim Burns artwork, the cover for his novel Slant. No, or is it Queen of Angels? Someone will know. And this is my parents with a possibly a Japanese fan, not 100% sure, and circa 2000. Can we read that? I can't quite read that. Mitch for Higurashi. Patrick says it's Slant. Thank you. When I'm on Zoom, my brain does not work as well as it should. And this is us having a wonderful lobster roll dinner in Edmonds, which is a suburb near where we live in Linwood, Washington. And this was 2010. No, I'm thinking it's 2020-ish based on what I'm wearing. And the particular restaurant too, because that wasn't open in 2010. And yes, Maggie says Batten and Bitten was part of a story, so it was a little bit of a drama. You know, it was a tiny one-act play that took place over the course of 45 seconds, and a lot of costume presentations now have built on the idea of telling a story. So that was a little bit of an outlier at the time.
In our talks, you mentioned that the trips to JPL were always a bit of a highlight. And I believe Greg would get invited, well, partly as a science fiction author, but also was probably great for him to handle, to get some direct science experience as well. Any of those stand out besides the ones where you met Bradbury?
Well, they were all fabulous, and that the whole idea got started with the Apollo launches. So Greg didn't get to go to any of those, but Joe Green, who is still alive, he was an
Yes.
engineer and science fiction fan, and so I believe he did not work for NASA, but he might have worked for McDonnell Douglas, possibly. I'm not 100% sure on that. So he let the science fiction community know, the writers especially, that if they could get a press accreditation, you could see Apollo launches from Florida. And they had these legendary house parties that would last for 2 or 3 days, that people would come in town for the launches and get together, and the Haldemans would come, and Polly and Kelly Frias would come, and assorted other people, and you never knew who was going to turn up at these parties. Cannot remember the name of the journalist, but this one fellow brought the Russian poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko to one of the parties once, and so they were great. And so the first time I got to go on one of those, I was in the press dependence area, which is like 3 miles away. But then I got my own press credential for the Orinda. Orinda Times, which is like a weekly little newspaper that wasn't really a newspaper, but I had my own press credential, so I got to be in the main press site, which is the one that you see in all the coverage with a countdown clock in front of it, and you're close enough when it's a moon launch, you can literally feel the ground shake from the big Saturn V rockets. It's quite an experience.
Those lunches were quite wonderful. I remember them from when we were living in Florida, and yes, Joe's parties were always something that people wanted to attend. That, as you said, he is still around, and well worth visiting for any of you who know him. Okay. The launches and things like that were always a wonderful thing to see, but there was so much going on at both locations in the East and West Coast with their extra equipment. Did you guys ever have a chance to go into the back areas where they had various type of equipment that did not, well, sometimes was back in JPL or at Kennedy. But to see some of the background.
We got to go into the vehicle assembly building once, which is vast. It had 4 bays in it that each could hold a Saturn rocket and the associated stuff. I mean, it was at the time, I think it was the biggest volume building in the United States. Could be misremembering that, but it was huge. And I remember, so they'd assemble the moon rocket in the VAB, and it would be on this crawler, this giant tracked vehicle that would move it very, very slowly, like 2 miles or 3 miles an hour to the launch pad, and that the track that it was on was gravel, roughly that big, and you could see after the vehicle had passed, the gravel was just crushed into very fine sand. The weight of it was just so much.
It was an experience to ride one of those.
You got to ride one of the crawlers? Wow.
Yes, I worked on launch support.
Oh, cool. Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I was actually a college intern who had the most generous boss. So anyway, but that's not pertinent to this. We are getting over an hour, and I wanted to add, we've had some good interaction with our audience. I'd like to open up some questions, and then maybe we can do some closing things later on. We have any additional questions from the audience? Can you, Edie,
Yeah, so the first person that has a question is Lenny Bayless. Lenny, would you please unmute and ask your question?
All right. Well, I wanted to ask whether Astrid is familiar with a novelette called Water Spider, written by Philip K. Dick in Worlds of If, January 1964, in which Poul is the protagonist who saves the world when visited from time travelers from the future. And in the chat, I will post the Wikipedia article about this, and also the issue, the story as it appeared in Worlds of If. Let's see if it all fits. Yeah, it all fits. And
cool. Yeah, Phil Dick was part of the circle of people that we knew. We visited him and his then wife Anne, I believe, when they were living at Point Reyes Station a few times. And yeah, I'm aware of that story, and it's kind of hilarious.
It's kind of horrid.
Good summary of that there.
Yeah. Well, the time travelers are not interested in A.E. Van Vogt, and they just nod politely to Anthony Boucher because they're urgently trying to reach Poul to save the world.
He's the one to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lenny.
Okay.
Next, we have a question from Maggie Thompson. Maggie, would you please unmute?
You tell us how the Gordon Dickson combination that created the Hokas came about, and how were those co-conceived? Starting with a Western, as I recall.
Yeah, the Sheriff of Canyon Gulch might have been the first Hoka story. If that is the Western one, and I really don't know how it came about. So my dad and Gordy were friends. They met through the Minneapolis Fantasy Society, which is basically a science fiction club that's still going in the Minneapolis area. And they lived in the same apartment building for a couple of years. And the MFS folks would get together and they'd play baseball and they'd put on plays and they do all kinds of stuff. And so they just hung out together a lot and became very good. And my dad and Gordy became lifelong friends. And they were both professional writers at that time. So I suspect beer might have been involved, and they just had this idea of, sentient teddy bears that like to imitate things, and plot would ensue. and they're great fun as stories, and there's still, you can still read them. I think Bain has the contract on those now. And Fred learned. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Edie. You
Okay,
you-
thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Okay, so next is Jerry and Susan. Please
Hi,
unmute.
and we know that you and Greg had some influence and input into the beginning of the Experience Music Project, which had a big science fiction section. By the way, folks, it has gone through about 6 different name changes and is now the Museum of Popular Culture. If you guys ever come to Seattle, that's something to look at. Okay, go.
So Greg was not involved with the Experience Music Project to begin with. That was a personal project of Paul Allen, and it was strictly
you meant
based
the
on
science fiction
music. But he got an email from sort of an anonymized email from someone when would that have been? About 2003, saying, "Would you be interested in helping consult on a science fiction museum to be held in Seattle?" And he figured, oh, this is Paul Allen, because we knew that Paul Allen was a big science fiction fan. And we'd heard that from Bob Brown, who was a bookseller, who sadly died a few years ago. Really nice guy. He and his wife Sharon lived in the Bay Area for a while. So some of the Bay Area folks might remember the Browns. And B. Brown Books in Seattle was his last bookstore. Anyway, and Bob knew that Paul Allen but Paul Allen specifically, but also other tech rich folks in the area were buying up, first editions and artwork and so on. They were big science fiction fans. And so Greg got this email, said, "Are you interested in working on a museum, a science fiction museum?" And he thought, ding, this is Paul Allen. And so he sent back and saying, "Yes, I feel that science fiction is as important to Seattle and science fiction as Jimi Hendrix was, because Paul Allen was a big Jimi Hendrix fan, and it was originally going to be a Jimi Hendrix museum, and he was persuaded to make it be bigger. And that was Jacob McMurray, who is still working for Mopop as curator, and we got brought in, both of us, as consultants, and we brought in lots of other folks. The first board, consulting board was recruited by us, including the Trimbles and assorted other folks. Donna Shirley was part of that. She was a NASA engineer who spearheaded one of the Mars rovers, wrote a really good book about it, and then she became the director of the museum. Anyway, so we were very involved in that from the beginning, and helped put them in touch with the existing Science Fiction Hall of Fame people, which was based in Kansas City, Jim Gunn Center, Robin Wayne Bailey, and so on. And so the Allen folks persuaded the Hall of Fame people to let them take over the Hall of Fame, and things got changed a lot. So it's a very long, complicated story. At the heyday of it, the Science Fiction Museum within EMP was a marvelous thing. It's gotten kind of diffused throughout the collection now, and so it's a little bit less of a standalone attraction, but they've got some good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Suzel. Fred, would you please unmute and ask your question?
I shall do that. Poul Anderson wrote A Game of Empire, which is one of several science fictional retellings of Rudyard Kipling's Kim. And am I correct in thinking that your father was something of a Kipling fan?
Absolutely. Yeah, he had a Kipling set, and his mother, my grandmother, was a big Kipling fan as well. So I think he came by it honestly, at his mother's knee, and kept up with it. And I appreciated both Kipling's prose and his poetry.
Did you inherit that liking too?
Yeah, I enjoy Kipling as much as the next person.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. I am not aware of any other questions. Would you please say something in the chat if you have a question that you would like to ask? Okay, Jerry, you're up. Would you please unmute?
Okay. Astrid, I wanted to ask you about your fiber arts. I've got the yarn colorway that you did. I'm thinking it was for Boscone one year, but I know that you do a lot with fiber arts, and I'd just like to know more about that and how you got into it and what the satisfactions are.
Okay. Um, my mother taught me how to knit when I was, 10, 11, and I did a little bit and, kind of put it aside, also crocheting and embroidery and so on. So I circled back into fiber, and then costuming, sewing, it's all kind of a thing. I got back into knitting specifically, probably, in the 90s and then more in the 2000s. And, I knew some other knitters who were doing dyed yarns, and I thought, oh, this looks like fun. I could do this. So I had a little business called Damselfly Yarns that was doing. I was, dyeing yarn for mostly for socks in my kitchen, and also doing some lace weight yarn and a little bit of worsted weight too. So I did get to do a commission yarn for. I think I did them so the year Greg was guest of honor at. That's not quite right. Anyway, I did bring some yarn to Boscone once, and I think twice. I think
Hmm.
two subsequent years I did those. And I'm not doing professional dyeing anymore. It was fun while it lasted. I had some cool experiences. There's knitters conventions. Who knew? But the idea of getting together with like-minded folks is extended to so many things. But I
Did you do any for any other conventions or fannish groups or anything? Any other dyeing?
No, I didn't do any commissions for other
Whoa.
convention groups. I did do, someone commissioned me like a knitting store in Toledo, Ohio, was doing uh, knitting at the baseball game thing, and I accepted a commission for delivering them 30 skeins of
Oh,
sock yarn dyed in the colors of the AAA local team, which is the Toledo Mud Hens. So it was red, white, and blue yarn. And you may have heard of the Toledo Mud Hens because Corporal Klinger in the TV show MASH was a big fan of the Toledo Mud Hens.
I've just noticed world cons kind of, in the years since you've done that, world cons have gotten much more craft oriented and fiber arts oriented and stuff. So it's been really fun to see the kind of connection and overlap between those communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Andy, you're next.
I feel sort of unworthy bringing this up, but um, in 1969 at that masquerade where the Bat and the Bitten was performed, and a number of other famous costumes were presented, and it was I think that's a fairly famous masquerade. There was also a notorious disaster when a fan dressed as Charlie Brown crashed into the movie screen and tore the screen. And I was wondering if you had any recollection of that incident at all.
I remember seeing it happen as if it was in slow motion because he was backing up. He was doing the kite thing and backing up, and then fell off the stage into the screen that had been lowered behind him. And it was Rick Norwood, who went on to become a pretty well-known Southern Louisiana science fiction fan, and he and his wife were involved in putting on conventions. We got to know them over the years. Then I believe the next day, maybe at the banquet, Harlan Ellison did a fundraiser for that, and they got enough money for it to more than cover the cost of the screen, and then unilaterally decided to give the leftover money to Clarion. Does anybody else
Right.
remember that? And then there was kind of oh, how can you do that? It was it all got sorted out, but the screen was paid for and nobody got hurt, and so nobody died.
Yes, I
Right.
understand that Elliot Shorter was the one who objected the most to the arbitrary, and Elliot was very noticeable.
True.
Right. But the thing, I think its significance in the greater history of fandom is that I think people suddenly appreciated the economic potential of fandom and Worldcon and fandom in general and many other charitable events and efforts kind of grew, at least intellectually, from that incident. So that's why I brought it up.
Yeah,
Thank you.
interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Next up is David Clark. So, David, if you would unmute.
Am I unmuted? Hello, Astrid.
Hey, David.
I
Hi,
know
Dan.
you and Greg, of course, traveled lots to Europe and various places, Scandinavia, and various writing conferences. But in more recent years, you've taken up an interest in the Arctic Circle, and your friend Elizabeth, who lives there, and photography, which you're really developing as a very fine photographer. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you.
Experience there.
Well, we traveled when I was young, around the US, and I went to Europe for the first time and visiting relatives in Denmark when I was 10. And so, I do kind of have the travel bug. And so my friend Elizabeth, was living on Svalbard, which is an island high above the Arctic Circle. It's way above northern Norway. It's about 650 miles from the North Pole. And she was posting some amazing photographs and writing about the amazing experience she was having there. And so I said, I knew she was going to be leaving because he'd been there for about 6 years at that time. I said, oh, I want to come visit you, Elizabeth. So I came to visit her when would have been spring of 2024. And it was stunning. And as far as the photography, so I took a photography course when I was in college. So I've been dabbling in photography for a long time, but after Greg died, he had a really nice photography setup. And I thought, this is a really good camera. I should, kind of try to live up to it. So I've been getting more seriously into it. I use Lightroom Classic, not very well. It's got a really steep learning curve, but I'm learning more every time. And so that was an amazing trip that I got to take. And then Elizabeth had put together a small expedition cruise with 12 passengers that was going to be in the fall of that same year. And I said, oh, it sounds amazing. Put me on the waiting list if somebody can't come. And somebody couldn't come. So I got to go back to Svalbard the fall of that year. And we got to circumnavigate the main island and see some incredible icebergs and glaciers and a polar bear eating a reindeer and just phenomenal stuff. So I've had some really cool opportunities.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Excellent.
Sure.
Yeah. Were you done?
I just
I didn't mean to.
I just going to say I enjoyed seeing your photographic work, and I think it's a neat thing that you've got going. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Jim, you're next.
Hi, Astrid. I liked your short story in the San Diego Noir collection some years ago. I wondered what other fiction you've written, and do you intend to do more?
Hey, Jim, great to see you. Been quite a while.
Yeah.
So the story was a collaboration with Diane Clark, who's also on this, and she's working on a novel that takes that as a starting off point. I've done a little bit of journalism, a little bit of book reviewing, and trip reports and that kind of stuff. Writing is darn hard work. I do not have the writer bug, passion, must write or die. So I have no plans to write the great American novel or anything like that.
Oh, well, let me make a recommendation. You are articulate, so why don't you try dictation? You
I
can
will
do
take that
it
under
all the time
advisement.
easily now. And,
Yeah.
and you can write so much faster that way, and you don't have to fool around with your fingers on a keyboard. I mean, you can think faster than you can talk, but you type slower than either one.
Okay. Good tip. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any other questions for Astrid? I don't know about any. So anyone out there, last chance to get in with a question. Okay, Joe, at this time, we don't have any more questions.
Okay. As we've gone through, we've covered a wide range of things, and I'm glad for all these questions, which brought up things that I didn't. If you got anything else that this has triggered that you'd think some of the fans might be interested in?
No, I don't think so.
It's
Thank you for good questions, and thanks to the audience for good questions. And I appreciate people turning up for this.
Well, thank you very much.